Good morning, Gamecock fans. Today is Monday, July 7th, the year of our Lord 2025. And this is Coffee with JC Shurburtt. Happy to have you join me today, a little later in the morning with no other show and stuff like that. Just kind of wanted to give it a chance to come up with some better stuff to tell you guys. Had to have some reflection time, right? To get prepped and ready to go after a nice 4th of July weekend. The wife and I and the stepkids did a low country boil on Friday. It was excellent. Hats off to Nat, my wife, for getting that together. But it's one of those things that you know we we kind of planned and did and executed, and I'm happy with it. Had some relaxation time as well over the weekend, especially on Thursday and on Saturday. So back and ready to roll. We should not have any interruptions with coffee through football season. Maybe a travel day in there for yours truly to get to Atlanta, but we're not leaving until Saturday to get down there. So we'll have all that Labor Day weekend schedule for you when the time comes. But the show and the morning show will be back on Monday, next Monday, 1 week from today, as we start season 4 of Inside the Gamecocks. Excited about that. Excited to really dig into this 2025 season because SEC Media Day starts in 1 week. Once you hit that, it's a couple of weeks in July to kind of talk things to death, and then practice starts and it gets real. I think there's 8 more Saturdays between now and the opener against the Hokies. So that's forthcoming. It's back, folks. And I'll just tell you this. I was most of the time when the season ends around here with the Gamecocks, it's kind of a relief sometimes, especially if it's not such a good year, and or if it's a year like in 2022 where the Gamecocks had a bunch of opt-outs for the bowl and sort of a tough, hard-fought, disappointing loss in the Gator Bowl, but you kind of look to the future, and you're like, well, who do they have coming back? There's the transfer portal situation that happens every year. There's coaching moves, all kinds of things that sort of, from my standpoint, the offseason's been fun. It's been one of those things I look forward to. Namely, because of what I do for a living, and then at other times, you're just kind of sitting back waiting to see what the team will look like the next year because you're hoping they'll make another step forward and all that. That was not the case this past year. I actually enjoyed watching this team play every minute of it. From about obviously the Oklahoma game on, things were hunky dory until the bowl game, but I just kind of looked. It was almost like with Lenore Sellers, what's he going to do now? Or with the defense, what are they going to do now? It's probably the most fun team to watch I've seen in a while. And they won games in different ways last year. Blew out some teams, had some thrillers. They found a way to win those, and that's always a lot of fun. The fun is in the winning, Will Muschamp once said. I find myself quoting him quite a bit. He had some quotes when he was at South Carolina for sure that were kind of underrated. He had a quote machine in Steve Spurrier before him, so that's the Muschamp quotes were get on people's nerves sometimes, obviously, but that's it. The fun is in the winning. It was fun to win, and it was fun to win in different ways, and I hated to see that season end. That's, I think, part of the reason, selfishly, beyond the business perspective and having things to talk about and having more games. I was disappointed about the lack of a playoff for the Gamecocks because I think with the way they were playing, they would have probably won one game, depending on the matchup. Obviously, if you get sent to if they had gotten sent to Columbus, I don't know that the same thing that happened to Tennessee would have happened to them, but they would have. I don't know that the Gamecocks would have been favored in that one. But everybody else, shoot, with the way Carolina was playing, that includes Texas and Notre Dame and everybody. I think Carolina would have given them a game, and that would have been more fun because it was more chances to watch this team play. But Lenore Sellers is back, so that's part of the fun right there. Number 16, and then on defense, number 6, Dylan Stewart's back, and that's certainly a whole lot of good fun. And it's here, because I think part of it too. basketball and baseball were just so disappointing. And it's so just like a long slog through those seasons. If you remember the previous year, basketball was in the NCAA tournament, and baseball also was in the NCAA tournament and went to a regional. The baseball season the previous year was disappointing. Mark Kingston got fired because of it, but still they were there. You kind of had something to do watching the team and all that good stuff. And a late collapse in that season. They were looking in good shape to host a regional and all that. And then they started losing games. But it was still, basketball and baseball by about mid-year, you just knew the team was going nowhere. And those are very disappointing seasons. It's just like, uh, you know, but hoping for better days out of basketball and baseball, both next year on the men's side of basketball. Obviously, we know the women are national powers, national runner-up with a team that definitely wasn't as good as UConn at the end of the day, but a team that had their struggles during the year as we relate it to that particular program. Not saying that they weren't any good. I think making the finals of the whole thing was a really good year for Dawn Staley and her team, but they're at a different level right now. And so, I can't call that season disappointing. You still got to go to the finals and all that good stuff. So that's kind of where we're at. But I think everybody's looking forward to football, and we're going to talk about the opener today against Virginia Tech, the way too early look at the Hokies, and we'll revisit this from time to time. Virginia Tech, when you really sort of dig into them, folks, they had a lot of transition. Now that could be, as far as the matchup for the Gamecocks go, both a good and bad thing. And Shane Beamer, South Carolina's head coach, facing his alma mater for the first time, mentioned this as it relates to the opener against Old Dominion last year, where, if you remember correctly, the Gamecocks struggled. They were fortunate to get out of there with a win over the Monarchs. Monarchs were not very good as the season went on. I think they missed a bowl game, a lot of close losses, but they had a lot of new players. They had kind of a different defensive scheme that gave the Gamecocks some trouble. Lenore Sellers was just getting going. It was not what you would call a stellar opener. And I think everybody was worried for about a week. The Gamecocks go up to Kentucky as a 9-point underdog and handled the Wildcats. And the season moved on from there. Certainly early part of last season, there were disappointing losses, LSU, Alabama, Ole Miss. But, they got it right. That opener, a lot of people they didn't hold it against the team because they came back and beat what was supposed to be a good Kentucky team. Not at the end of the day, not a very good Kentucky team, pretty handedly on the road. After all those losses to Mark Stoops in Kentucky, I think that's acceptable. Gamecocks kind of looked like Alabama that day. There was like dominant defense, just enough offense. Run game came out in the second half. Looked like old school Saban and Bama, where you just kind of look up and it's a domination because of defense. But it's a new year this year, obviously, and the Gamecocks have an opportunity to start off with a good record. You look at the first five games, and Carolina should be favored in 4 of them. I don't know about that Missouri game. I would assume they will not be a favorite in that one. We'll have to kind of see how all that goes with the Tigers and their season. They've got another good group of portal guys and a good roster, especially on defense. And Carolina hadn't won out there since 2017. So Missouri will be looking for revenge from that game they probably should have had in Columbia if it weren't for Delvon Campbell and Rocket Sanders' heroics and Lenore Sellers' heroics in the second half. Gamecocks probably go down there. But you look at the first 5, and there's a chance to get off to a good start, but the Gamecocks have to do it. And it starts in Atlanta with the Virginia Tech Hokies. Like I said before, South Carolina early line is anywhere from like 9.5, 8.5. And you look at Virginia Tech, and there are a lot of new faces. And that was a challenge last year against Old Dominion because when the staff scouts other teams, you're scouting for tendencies and coordinator calls and things like that, but you're also looking at individual players and matchups and saying, well, how can we get our guy on this guy? That kind of thing. It's a game of matchups, and it's going to be really difficult, I think, with all these new players plus two new coordinators to get a beat on that. Um, it's scary in a lot of ways. Uh, but Kyron Drones, the quarterback for Virginia Tech, is back. He's a dual threat guy. He's very capable. He can throw, he can run, obviously. They are going to go to a different offense this year with Philip Montgomery coming in. He used to be a co-coordinator at Baylor under Art Briles, was the head coach at Tulsa for a while. I don't know, when you look at him, what is he going to do will be my big question. Are they going to go way up tempo? Is it going to look like the Briles system? Does he have his own, like at Tulsa, he had his own kind of thing. He sort of did. That's the big question here with Montgomery. And he has the job, and so I think Virginia Tech will look a little different offensively this coming year. As far as that goes, you sort of look at who they've got, and the running back they have. Oh gosh, I didn't write his name down. He's in from Bowling Green. He's probably going to be the starter. The two starting receivers allegedly are Donovan Green from Wake Forest, who Carolina kind of evaluated out of the portal. He's a player that was a four-star recruit, just hasn't been healthy his whole career. They have to replace Jalen Lane, the son of Brian Lane, who coached Cutter Woods at Westside High School. Shout out to Brian and his son for all their success. So Jalen's gone, and Donovan Green and Cam Seldon from Tennessee, another transfer, will step in there. Kyle Atuner is going to be their starting centers. A couple of transfer portal offensive linemen will be in there. They did get Brandon Bennett's son from Coastal, is kind of a backup running back that will be in there for their offense. So it's drones and a lot of new faces for the Hokies offensively. And the Gamecocks have a lot of players that were on the team last year, but then a lot of new faces, just new from the transfer portal and all that defensively. But it's going to be a challenge. Like a contact told me, we were talking about the defensive front last week. This was in my Spur Notes article on thebigspur.com. It's South Carolina believes they have good players, right? But what are they going to do when the lights come on in Atlanta? That's the unknown. That's the unknown throughout college football when you have a lot of transition is, you could know kind of what you're going to get out of Tonka Hemingway and TJ Sanders and Debo Williams and Demetrius Knight, although he was only there 1 year and was a new player, Bam Martin Scott. Those veterans, that's why coaches like veterans. They like experienced players because you sort of know what you're going to get. They've been there before. This is going to be the first time under the lights for a lot of these teams. And there will be lights because the game is indoors, even though it's a 3 p.m. kickoff. So what's going to happen? That's the question. How do the Gamecocks bottle up the Hokies, offense? The good news is I can report to you that, the South Carolina staff feels like the defense is again fast. I think South Carolina will be fine up front defensively. I think when you look at the tackles, you're going to circle Nick Barrett. You're going to circle Monkel Goodwine, who's had a really good summer, and Gabriel Brownlow-Dendy. I don't know which pair of those will start, but I heard talent-wise, they feel like they're right there. There will be a fourth. Will that be Troy Pikes? I think so. I think the Georgia Southern transfer will be in the top four. People are going to ask about Xavion Hardy. It just kind of depends on what kind of progress physically he makes this summer, just to be honest, and how well he practices coming up. So that's probably five. And you got Devontae Miles in from Bowling Green, who's kind of a swing guy that could also play outside. And he's going to be in the mix too. So there's six at tackle. At edge, obviously, Dylan Stewart. Brian Thomas Jr. is a player that a lot of people are starting to talk about nationally. Both ESPN and I believe The Athletic both had um, Brian Thomas Jr. listed as a potential breakout player, which means they heard it from somebody. No, I'm sorry, it was CBS. It was CBS. Our guys, Matt Zenitz, did it. So here we go. So here we go with all that. So that's going to be kind of the offensive matchup with stopping Virginia Tech. Is how good are these new receivers that they have? How good will their running game be from a running back perspective? What kind of tempo are they going to run? And I'll say this about tempo. Not everybody's as tempo crazy as they once were, but it's still, especially when you got guys like South Carolina will have on defense making their first start. It can get guys out of position real quick. You can't get lined up. You have a dual threat quarterback there, some playmakers. It can be problematic. Now, what do I know? Do I know that they're going to just go crazy and go fast? No, that's what I would do though. And so I think you have an opportunity here to get caught with your pants down if you're not locked and loaded, especially with drones running the ball. I mean, that's going to be problematic. So South Carolina's defensive front and linebackers, Fred Johnson and either Sean Murphy or Justin Uncle Ronquo, whoever whoever you know steps up and wins that job, those guys are going to be important in the game defensively. And listen to this outbound portal. These numbers for Virginia Tech. Now it's a little interesting. Obviously Xavier Champlain left. He was their starting left tackle. Very good. Went to Auburn. Got a nice payday, is my understanding. He's from Wells Branch High School in South Carolina too, by the way. So they lost him. The secondary, my goodness. Moore went to LSU. He's one corner. Uh, Mansour Delaney, another corner, also at LSU. Jalen Stroman, a safety, is at Notre Dame. Mose Phillips, a safety, is at Missouri. And then on the offensive line, they also lost Gunnar Givens to Vanderbilt. I don't know if he was starting or not, but you sort of look at their two deep, and their inbound transfer guys are all over the place on defense. They do have a new coordinator on that side of the ball as well. These types of coaches scare me a little bit. This is a guy that there's probably not a lot of tape on. Sam Sifkis, they hired him from the Arizona Cardinals, where he's kind of one of those NFL guys, assistants to assistants. He used to be at William and Mary. Small school coaches are very good at strategy. So he is really, really good. Exposure to the Cardinals defensive scheme, one of the most innovative in the NFL, according to ESPN. So he's going to get creative. Now, what are they going to do? They got a lot of new players on defense, just a lot. Some transfers they brought in, D line wise, all three levels are a lot of transfer portal guys incoming for Virginia Tech. And so you don't know what's going to happen there. And the scheme, like innovative scheme, is can be an equalizer. Mike Shula, it'll be his playbook. He's gonna have it's the big game for him, obviously. As far as first game back as a play caller in college. You got Lenore Sellers. That's a good thing. Will the Hokies, what are they going to do? Are they going to try to confuse the Gamecocks up front, maybe blitz a little like Clemson did? I think that shows last year that could be dangerous, if you let Lenore's run all over you. Or will they drop and play defense? And if you look at some of the games last year where the Gamecocks offense sputtered a bit, including the bowl game against Illinois, like Ole Miss. Ole Miss was a little different because they got pressure with four. They did drop, but they got pressure with four. Vanderbilt did something similar. It wasn't an offensive explosion, but the Gamecocks were able to move it pretty well and handle them. Um, who else dropped a little bit? Did A&M drop a little bit? I think they did too. They got pressure with their front, but it wasn't like every game teams dropped and flooded the zone on the back end that Carolina struggled, but they did. In certain games they did. That proved to be problematic. The bowl game to me was more, as Beamer mentioned afterward, lost opportunity. I think Carolina drove it fine. They had their chances to put points on the board and just did not. But if you're going to get upset, that's what happens when they limit your opportunities and you can't finish the deal on drives. That's going to be important this whole season for the Gamecocks offense. And of course, Lenore Sellers can't turn it over. But going against this guy as a coordinator who, he's probably sitting around watching Gamecock tape all summer, and the Gamecock coaches are too, in fairness, he's going to come up with probably a pretty good game plan. Now, when you're playing the South Carolina offense, obviously there's different ways to do it. Different coaches last season had different ideas on how to do it. I mentioned the drop thing, but I mentioned what Clemson did. Clemson decided they were just going to come after him, that their defensive line was better than the South Carolina offensive line. And, they paid the consequences. I mean, they only gave up 17 points in the game. Carolina had some turnovers and things like that, as did the Tigers. But it was, that was one way to do it. Now you can do it many different ways. Missouri, in that game, it was 34-30 game. The Gamecocks had plenty of offense. They decided they weren't going to let Carolina run it and let Sellers run it, but and they didn't get a ton of pressure. Lenore's did escape some in that game, but Carolina lit them up through the air. So that would be my question too. You do have sort of a new group of receivers, an old and new group of receivers. You got some experienced guys, obviously, with the four coming back in Harbor, Brown, Bennett, and Jacobs. But then you got some new freshmen. So is Carolina going to be able to take advantage of some of these new starters in the secondary for Virginia Tech? A secondary that's really been gutted, that wasn't that bad last year. Obviously, had some individual talent, but getting open, connecting on passes, that's going to be a big key for the Gamecocks. Also, third down. You got to be able to stay on the field especially if Virginia Tech's running tempo on offense. The defense gets a stop. That's going to make the defense a little winded. I don't care how much you work out over the summer, that first game. Thankfully, it'll be in a climate controlled environment, so the heat will not be an issue. But you got to get out there and play. So that's the deal there. And being in game shape is a little different. So if you're getting tempoed on offense and then you can't get off the field and then you can't stay on the field with your offense, it could be a problematic contest for the Gamecocks, despite the fact that they're favored and they should be. So a lot of new faces on this Virginia Tech defense that you're not going to be able to get a good beat on, to know. So that's a difficult matchup just from a preparation standpoint, I believe, for Mike Shula and Lenore Sellers and all that. Talent wise, I always am very cautious about teams that get a lot of players from the portal, just like at Carolina last year. You had a bunch of portal guys coming in that maybe didn't, nobody had ever heard of Demetrius Knight or Kyle Kennard at the time, and they ended up being really good players. And that happens. Sometimes you don't get a good batch of portal guys, and you hope that there's a good portal batch this year at South Carolina. But sometimes teams that replace a bunch of players and it's doom and gloom, those players that come in have chips on their shoulder and are good athletes as well. They wouldn't be at Virginia Tech otherwise. And so they're a little confident and have something to prove that first game. And they're going to be excited about playing. It's an opener on a neutral site on a Sunday in a national television window. Virginia Tech, to win, if they win this game and find a way to beat Vanderbilt the next week, 2-0 start against two SEC schools, that's gonna really kind of calm the storm with Brent Pry a little bit up there, and he has not had the best seasons in Blacksburg since taking over for Justin Fuente, who, in my opinion, up there really because of his lack of desire to recruit. really set their roster back. Like a lot of schools, NIL has been tough for them, losing players out of the portal. I mean, they got seriously, if they had all these guys back, that they lost in the portal, number one, I don't think Carolina would be a 9.5 point favorite. I think it'd be somewhere around three, if that. And, last year they lost a lot of close ones. Boy, Miami, they had Miami beat. I think the ACC office did them a favor with the long review and, you know, overturning that touchdown, which if you went back and watched that game, that the call in the field should have stood because they didn't have enough evidence to overturn it. I just think they did because Miami being, avoiding losses, would have it ended up being that SMU got in the playoff anyway, which stunk. But if you go back and win that Miami, if Miami loses that game, that pretty much took them out of the conversation. I'm not declaring a conspiracy theory. I just thought it was awfully funny that it took that long, and all of a sudden Miami wins the game. But that was a Friday night game. I watched almost every play of it and thought the Hokies should have had it. Should have had it. So a lot of games where they, could have been in the game. They're a proud program. Obviously, Frank Beamer established Virginia Tech as a relevant program in college football. They have in this era, they do have some challenges. A lot of it is always related to their location. They're basically the big state university in Virginia because UVA is a public Ivy and a very limited amount of students get into Virginia. But Virginia Tech's kind of where everybody, it was described to me once as where all the normal people go. And so it's got, as the state university in Virginia, it's got some things going for it. But Blacksburg is sort of an outpost and it's located, I mean, from the 757, you have to go through Charlottesville to get to Blacksburg. It's kind of, if it were in Richmond or someplace else, I think the location would be a little bit better for them. But, Frank Beamer did it through making very good evaluations, particularly in state. He spearheaded that. He always had good coordinators and a good plan on both sides of the ball, to get them. And then, you have Michael Vick and Tyrod Taylor and all those great. Marcus Vick was a really good quarterback for them. They always seem to have that. They always seem to be able to run the ball, despite maybe not recruiting numbers wise as well on the offensive line. They always had a good offensive line, and then their defense under Bud Foster. Although toward the end with tempo spread offenses, it wasn't as effective, but I'll never forget the upset they had in Columbus that year against Urban Meyer and Ohio State to open the season. Bud Foster worked on that game plan the whole summer. I think the Hokies maybe take a page out of that and they're working on a game plan to pull the upset over the Gamecocks. But South Carolina has a talent advantage in this one from where I see it. It's tough to kind of get a feel because like some of these guys they got out of the portal could be really, really good. And we just don't know. And it's going to be tough to get a scouting report on them. You're going to have to go watch a lot of film from a lot of other schools, but I know the Gamecock coaching staff has got that rolling right now, but this could be a problematic game. If you ask me, I'm not going to pick it right now, obviously, because it's July 7th. But looking at it's if Carolina could get out of there with a 6 point win, 3 to 6 point win, you take it, you move forward. And the elephant in the room, obviously, is that openers have not gone maybe as well around here. Beamer's teams tend to get better as the season goes along. They play some ugly football in September at times. You look at it, that game against Eastern Illinois, his first game, that was not a formidable opponent, if you will. They were pretty bad. So no problems there, but they turned around the next week, went to East Carolina, not a great ECU team. They won 20 to 17 on the last second field goal. The Georgia State game in 2022 was a 35-14 win thanks to some special teams, big time special teams plays. North Carolina in 2023 happened. That was an L. And then last year's great escape against Old Dominion should get some players' attention. That game last year was a struggle. And so, you worry about that. You worry about that kind of history repeating itself or whatnot. Carolina last year, the opener itself was a donkey, obviously, struggling against Old Dominion. But then they got up pretty well. They got up off the mat and beat Kentucky pretty good and took LSU to the wire and all that good stuff. So it's not like they had a whole September of struggles. But obviously they did get better as the season went on. And, if you're going to take advantage of this opportunity, which are some games that are quote unquote, you should be favored in. I'm not going to say winnable because they're all winnable. They're all losable too. But it's supposed to be the favorite early on. It starts right here with Virginia Tech. South Carolina's also lost 3 straight games on neutral sites. Since I started following football as a human being closely in 1986, they have never won in Atlanta in any building. This is their first game at Mercedes-Benz, but a lot of road losses to Georgia Tech, a couple of them, and then the 2 losses in Atlanta in 2010, both to Auburn in the championship game, and then to Florida State in the Peach Bowl. Atlanta, as little as Carolina's played over there, they haven't really won. So it's a chance to end some streaks, right? The Atlanta streak and the neutral site streak, and to play a little better in an opener. The game is set for 3 p.m. on Sunday, August the 31st. It'll be televised live by ESPN. Notre Dame, Miami is that night on ABC. I think those are the only 2 big-time games. Texas and Ohio State thought about changing their game, but Texas said no. I don't blame them. No, I want that puppy at noon right away to play the Buckeyes. And so that's not happening. So that's what's going on there on that day. All right. Don't forget the show in the morning show, Inside the Gamecocks, will be back 1 week from today for SEC Media Days. SEC Sunday Night returns next Sunday night to do that. And we'll have a full slate of content on the Big Spur, also right here on Chief Sports South Carolina. Please like, subscribe, and share. This has been Coffee with JC Shurburtt. Have a great day, everyone. Holla.